It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. Niccolo Machiavelli was simply honest in a way most people couldn't handle. In The Prince, he stripped away the romantic illusions surrounding power, morality, and leadership. His lessons weren't about how the world should work, but how it does. These are not ideals, they are tools. Tools for survival, strategy, and control. Whether you're leading a country, running a company, or just trying to navigate human behavior, Machiavelli's ideas hold a brutal kind of clarity. Below are 10 of his most enduring lessons. Number 1. Power is perception. In most situations, what others believe about you matters far more than who you actually are. You could be courageous, intelligent, or morally sound, but if you appear weak, insecure, or incompetent, people will treat you as such. Likewise, even if you're uncertain or flawed, projecting confidence and control can inspire trust, admiration, and obedience. Machiavelli understood this clearly. Perception shapes reality. Leaders are not required to be genuinely virtuous, they only need to seem virtuous. Appear just, appear honest, appear capable. That illusion alone is enough to sway the masses. Most people won't dig beneath the surface. They respond to image, to signals, to presentation, not depth. In politics, business, relationships, and social life, the art of appearance often outweighs the truth. Those who master it rule. Number 2, the ends justify the means. Perhaps Machiavelli's most infamous idea, often misquoted or misunderstood, but its core is brutally real. When your goal is survival, stability, or long-term success, your actions are ultimately judged by their outcomes, not by the moral code they violate. Mercy is admirable, but only when it works. Cruelty, though unpleasant, can be necessary if it prevents greater harm or chaos. Lying, manipulation, betrayal. These are not celebrated, but they are acceptable if they secure power, maintain order, or protect your rule. Machiavelli wasn't endorsing evil. He was describing reality with ruthless clarity. If an unclean method results in peace or safety, then that peace is what counts. In a world ruled by wolves, the lamb who clings to purity will be the first to fall. Principles are noble, but results are what history remembers. Number 3, be both a fox and a lion. Machiavelli taught that a successful leader must blend cunning with strength, not choose between them. The fox is clever, able to detect traps, lies, and hidden dangers. The lion is bold and fierce, able to intimidate enemies and crush resistance. Too much of one without the other leads to downfall. A leader who relies only on strength will be tricked. A leader who relies only on cleverness will be crushed. True power lies in mastering both. You must be sharp enough to recognize deceit and strong enough to act decisively when force is required. Intelligence without the will to act is weakness. Strength without foresight is reckless. The ideal ruler is adaptable, clever when necessary, fierce when needed. Knowing when to play each role is what separates mere survivors from true rulers. Number 4, fear is more reliable than love. Machiavelli didn't claim love has no value, only that it's fragile and conditional. People will love you when it suits them, when it benefits their interests. But that love is quick to fade or vanish when circumstances change. Fear, on the other hand, creates a deeper sense of control. People are far more likely to obey what they fear than what they love. But this isn't permission to be a tyrant. Machiavelli warned that while being feared is effective, being hated is dangerous, even fatal. The key is balance. Use fear wisely, not excessively. Avoid unnecessary cruelty. Punish when you must, but do it swiftly and justly. Instill boundaries, not trauma. Fear should bring order, not chaos. It should protect your position, not provoke rebellion. A feared ruler can survive. A hated one rarely does. Number 5, fortune favors the bold. To Machiavelli, fortune was like a wild woman, unpredictable, fierce, and often violent. She cannot be controlled, but she shows respect to those who dare to take risks and seize the moment. Leaders who passively wait for perfect conditions or safe opportunities often find themselves outpaced or defeated. True power belongs to those who act decisively, who impose their will on the chaos of life rather than submit to it. Playing it safe is an illusion that leads to missed chances and stagnation. Fortune rewards those who are brave enough to face uncertainty head-on and shape their own destiny. Greatness demands courage and boldness. Fortune never smiles on hesitation or timidity. Number 6. Avoid being hated. It's true you can be feared or unpopular and still maintain power, but hatred is deadly. Hatred breeds resentment, conspiracies, rebellions, and even assassination. History shows that even the most brutal leaders survive if they avoid becoming the target of everyone's anger and hatred. People may tolerate harsh rule or strong leadership, but they will never accept humiliation, betrayal, or injustice directed at them personally. If you must impose harsh rules or raise taxes, do it carefully, blame others if possible, and implement changes gradually. Always remember to offer the public small rewards, festivals, distractions, or acts of mercy to soften resentment. Control public sentiment before it turns into violent opposition. Master the delicate balance between fear and hatred, and your rule will endure. Number 7. Adapt to changing circumstances. Machiavelli placed great emphasis on flexibility and responsiveness. A man who thrived under one set of conditions might quickly fail under another if he stubbornly refuses to change his approach. Fortune is unpredictable and constantly shifting, and the political landscape is always evolving. What worked yesterday may no longer be effective today. Clinging rigidly to old methods or traditions is not a virtue. It's a dangerous liability. Successful leaders are those who constantly reassess their environment, recognize new realities, and adjust their strategies accordingly. Pride in outdated habits can blind you to threats. To survive and dominate, you must evolve with the times or risk becoming obsolete. The tools that once saved you may become the instruments of your downfall if held too tightly. Number 8. Appearances are more important than reality. People rarely perceive your true intentions or character. They respond to the image you project. Machiavelli argued it is better to seem good than to be good, because public opinion is shaped by what people see, not by what they discover after digging deeper. Appear religious, even if you are not. Appear generous, even if your motives are purely strategic. Maintaining the illusion is more powerful than the actual truth. Machiavelli didn't advise constant lying, but recommended using appearances as strategic tools to influence perception. Authenticity matters little if no one perceives it. In the game of power, what is seen becomes reality itself. Number 9. Break promises when necessary. Machiavelli viewed political promises not as sacred obligations, but as strategic tools to be used or discarded depending on the situation. A wise leader honors commitments only when it serves their interests. When circumstances change, a promise that once made sense can become a dangerous liability. Don't let past words chain you to a failing path or destroy your future. People break their word all the time, especially when the cost of keeping it outweighs the benefits. To Machiavelli, rigid loyalty is a weakness, while strategic dishonesty is a sign of intelligence and adaptability. But discretion is key. Public betrayal damages your reputation far more than quiet, careful maneuvering behind the scenes. Use broken promises as a weapon, but wield it wisely. Number 10. Arm yourself. For Machiavelli, arms symbolized preparedness and self-reliance. A prince who depends on others for defense or protection is weak and vulnerable to betrayal or abandonment. Relying on luck or external support leaves you fragile and exposed. True power comes from having control over your own means of defense, whether that means literal weapons, loyal soldiers, or political influence. In today's world, the lesson remains vital. Arm yourself with skills, resources, knowledge, and alliances you can trust. Never place your security solely in the hands of others. If you cannot defend what you have, then you do not truly possess it. Strength and survival depend on your readiness to protect your position at all costs. Machiavelli's brilliance lay in his unflinching realism. Unlike many thinkers who cloaked power in the language of virtue and morality, he confronted power as it truly is: messy, cruel, unstable, and necessary. He didn't romanticize leadership or pretend that rulers could always be good or just. Instead, Machiavelli's goal was practical: to help rulers navigate the harsh realities of human nature and politics without falling victim to naivety or idealism. He understood that morality, while admirable, is often a luxury that those who seek or hold power cannot always afford. In the brutal arena of human affairs, idealists who cling to ethical absolutes frequently find themselves crushed by more pragmatic, even ruthless opponents. Realists, on the other hand, survive and often thrive. This is why The Prince remains a timeless masterpiece. Whether you are leading a nation, running a business, managing a team, or even steering your own life, the lessons Machiavelli offers don't guarantee moral purity. They guarantee something more pragmatic: control, stability, and the ability to shape outcomes despite chaos and opposition.
What if those who are least fit to lead are precisely the ones most drawn to leadership positions? Imagine entering a corporate meeting or stepping into a legislative chamber and realizing the person wielding the most authority may also be the one least deserving of it. This contradiction leads to a troubling question. Could the very systems we rely on to choose leaders be fundamentally flawed? Look closely at the landscape of politics, global business, and social institutions. A common thread becomes visible. Over and over, we see individuals rising to power not necessarily because of their virtues, but often in spite of their flaws. History offers countless examples. Take a former American president who reached the highest office in the land, only to ultimately lose the trust of the people. Though he was brilliant and seasoned, his downfall was marked by dishonesty, paranoia, and an overwhelming need to manipulate. Ironically, these very characteristics helped him climb the ladder to power. These aren't new ideas. Hundreds of years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli identified a similar pattern while observing the politics of Renaissance Italy. In his provocative work, The Prince, he made a striking observation. People judge leaders more by appearances than by actual deeds. In his words, everyone can see what you seem to be, but few truly know who you are. He wasn't advocating trickery. He was simply pointing out a truth about how people perceive leadership. In fact, psychological research today supports his conclusions. Studies have found that people who display overconfidence are often mistaken for being more competent than they really are. Even when their actual abilities fall short, they still gain credibility. In this discussion, we'll explore why toxic traits like narcissism, dishonesty, and a lack of insight often help people ascend to leadership roles. We'll also look at examples of those who broke the mold and the lessons we can extract from their success. Machiavelli advised that a leader should avoid behaviors that make them appear inconsistent, petty, or cowardly. This insight still applies. In modern terms, individuals who exhibit extreme confidence, even arrogance, tend to outperform more honest, uncertain candidates in leadership competitions. Consider a hypothetical situation. A group of people gets lost in unfamiliar terrain. Two individuals offer to guide them. One says, "I'm not completely certain, but I think there are several routes we could try." The other declares with full conviction, "I know exactly where to go. Follow me." Though the first person is truthful and open about the ambiguity, most people will gravitate toward the second individual. The illusion of certainty is persuasive. This pattern repeats across workplaces, communities, and even nations. We favor those who seem sure of themselves, whether or not their certainty is justified. A broad study analyzing data across multiple trials found that narcissistic individuals are disproportionately chosen for leadership roles. Their charisma, boldness, and self-assurance make them appealing. But once in charge, they tend to cause more volatility, invite bad strategic choices, and destabilize organizations. One notable example is the former head of a shared office startup. He built a narrative so compelling that investors poured in billions. Despite the company bleeding money, he promised transformation and world-changing innovation. But when reality caught up to the hype, the company's valuation collapsed, taking his reputation with it. His story serves as a perfect example of how traits that help one rise can later cause spectacular failure. The human mind favors clarity, especially in moments of uncertainty. Research consistently shows that people are more likely to trust confident speakers, even when those speakers are wrong. As one psychologist put it, we often prioritize confidence over correctness. Machiavelli echoed this view. noting that rulers often gain admiration for grand projects and bold moves, regardless of the results. It's not always about what's real. It's about what looks impressive. Yet, not every leader fits this mold. Some rare individuals manage to lead with authenticity and substance. Take the example of a statesman from southern Africa, who became the first leader of his independent nation. Instead of ruling through ego or intimidation, he built systems that empowered others. Under his leadership, his country transformed from one of the least developed to one of the most stable and economically successful on the continent. Life expectancy rose dramatically, and economic growth flourished. His style, based on humility and long-term vision, stands in stark contrast to the narcissistic patterns we usually see. Reflect on the great leaders you've known or studied. Have you noticed the difference between those who rise through spectacle and those who lead through substance? Machiavelli noted that while integrity is admired, those who achieve greatness often downplay its importance and rely instead on clever tactics and strategic deception. That doesn't necessarily mean lying outright. Often, it's about controlling the narrative. Think of a magician performing a trick. The audience focuses on one hand, while the other carries out the sleight of hand. Many leaders adopt similar methods, highlighting one piece of information while quietly hiding the rest. This tactic works because humans are wired with something behavioral economists call optimism bias. We tend to interpret vague or mixed information in the most hopeful light. When a leader frames bad news in a positive way, we're likely to accept the narrative, especially if we want to believe in it. Leaders use this tendency to shape perception, steering attention toward their chosen version of events. For example, a company might rebrand its financial losses as strategic investments, or celebrate modest achievements as groundbreaking progress. And strangely, this often works. A university study found that when leaders put a positive spin on difficult news, morale and productivity actually increased even if the situation remained challenging. Machiavelli understood this long ago. He wrote that when a leader wins and maintains power, the means they use to do so are often seen as justifiable in hindsight. Success, in other words, can make even questionable methods appear noble. But there are companies that defy this model. One outdoor clothing company became famous for radical honesty. They openly discussed the environmental damage caused by their products, and even ran campaigns urging customers not to buy more than they need. Far from harming their business, this transparency boosted loyalty and helped their brand grow far beyond competitors. Interestingly, the most dangerous kind of deception in leadership isn't what's told to others, it's what leaders tell themselves. Research shows that power increases the likelihood of self-delusion. Leaders often begin to believe their own hype, even in the face of contradictory evidence. This creates a cycle. The more they believe in their narrative, the more confidently they present it, and the more people accept it, reinforcing the leader's self-deception. Machiavelli also offered a clever way to judge a leader's intelligence. Look at who they surround themselves with. Wise rulers attract capable advisors. Insecure ones prefer weak subordinates. Ironically, leaders who appear simple or unthreatening often gain more trust than those who are deeply thoughtful or complex. This is known in psychology as the beer test. Voters often favor candidates they could imagine having a drink with, rather than those who seem too polished or intellectual. It sounds silly, but the implications are serious. Highly competent individuals may lose ground to simpler, more relatable ones. This plays into the pratfall effect, a psychological phenomenon where competent individuals become more likable when they show slight flaws or relatable traits. In contrast, those who appear perfect or overly academic can be off-putting, no matter how capable they are. Reflect on fast-rising leaders you've seen in your own experience. Were they the ones who offered deep insights, or those who spoke with catchy, confident simplicity? People are uncomfortable with uncertainty, and when faced with complexity, they often retreat to the comfort of clear, decisive answers, even when those answers oversimplify reality. Research from Stanford found that CEOs who spoke in simpler language were more likely to get hired and paid more, but were also more likely to fail in complex business environments where subtle thinking was essential. Machiavelli believed a leader should focus above all on what is practical and visible, like military preparedness in his time. In modern terms, this suggests that leaders are often rewarded for appearing focused and resolute, even if they ignore nuance or long-term consequences. This leads us to what could be called the complexity trap. Those best equipped to handle complexity may be least likely to win leadership roles, simply because their realism appears less confident or inspiring. Then there's the famous Machiavellian line: "It is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both." This reflects a deeper truth. In leadership, empathy, though virtuous, can sometimes be a strategic disadvantage. Machiavelli wasn't promoting cruelty, but highlighting the hard choices leaders often face. Modern neuroscience supports this. Studies show that as people gain power, their brain's empathy circuits become less active. This might sound alarming, but it may actually be an adaptation. Just as surgeons must emotionally detach to perform life-saving procedures, leaders must sometimes act against their emotional instincts to make difficult decisions for the greater good. Have you ever been in a position where empathy held you back from making a tough but necessary choice? This helps explain why those with lower natural empathy, including those with narcissistic traits, may find leadership roles easier to navigate. Their emotional detachment can resemble the decisiveness we admire in authority figures. One study showed that people scoring higher in narcissism were significantly more likely to emerge as leaders during group tasks. Machiavelli would not have been surprised. He noted that people are easily deceived, especially by those who project confidence during times of need. This detachment often enables leaders to lie or manipulate more easily. But Machiavelli didn't glorify deceit. He just acknowledged its effectiveness in political settings. He also said it's good for a leader to seem kind, honest, and virtuous even if they're not. That may sound cynical, but it captures a psychological truth. We tend to reward those who look like leaders more than those who actually lead well. Angela Merkel's handling of the refugee crisis in Europe offers a case study in the complexity of leadership virtues. Her choice to accept over 1 million refugees involved a delicate balance of empathy and pragmatism. Had she leaned too heavily on either side, being too soft or too cool, the outcome might have been far worse. Her success lay in knowing when to lead with her heart and when to act with restraint. Alternative leadership models exist. One of the most promising is the servant leadership approach, which encourages leaders to prioritize their team's well-being above their own ambitions. A major wholesale retail chain exemplified this. Under a CEO who believed in treating employees well, the company paid higher wages, offered generous health care, and built a culture of trust. While rivals focused on cutting costs, this company retained talent, saw lower turnover, and outperformed its biggest competitor in stock growth over time. The challenge isn't choosing between being kind or being effective. It's developing the wisdom to know which virtue to apply in a given context. Aristotle, whose ideas deeply influenced Machiavelli, argued that real virtue isn't rigid. It's about finding the right balance for the situation at hand. Machiavelli once wrote that there's a vast difference between how people do live and how they should live. Those who act solely according to how things ought to be often find themselves destroyed, while those who respond to reality as it is are more likely to endure. This touches on a key flaw in leadership systems. The traits that help people climb the ladder are often different from, sometimes even opposed to the traits that help them govern well once they arrive. It's similar to choosing someone to play a doctor in a film versus hiring a real one in a hospital. The actor may fit the image perfectly, confident, composed, attractive. But in an actual medical emergency, all the charm in the world means nothing without training and competence. The same disconnect exists in leadership selection. Often, we reward performance over substance. Flashy presentations, self-promotion, and theatrical conviction win over audiences. Meanwhile, thoughtful, qualified individuals are overlooked because they don't perform leadership in a familiar or expected way. This phenomenon is backed by research. Studies show that narcissistic individuals are more likely to rise in groups. However, once in charge, they often fail due to arrogance, impulsiveness, or ethical blind spots. This contradiction is known as the leadership paradox. It reflects something ancient and primal. Our instincts evolved in tribal environments where dominance, strength, and decisiveness meant survival. In those times, following the loudest, boldest person might have made sense. But in modern organizations that rely on cooperation, nuance, and complex problem-solving, these same traits can become liabilities. Surprisingly, our instincts haven't changed much. Research shows that we still associate leadership potential with physical traits like height, vocal tone, and body language, just like our primate cousins do. Yet, these traits have almost nothing to do with a person's actual leadership effectiveness. Machiavelli explained this in his own terms. The masses just want not to be oppressed, while the ruling class often seeks power for its own sake. This dynamic creates a dangerous cycle. Those most eager to lead are often the least equipped to wield power wisely. Meanwhile, those who could govern thoughtfully often shy away from politics altogether. History offers counterexamples that break this pattern. Nelson Mandela, for instance, endured decades of imprisonment and emerged not with a hunger for revenge, but with a vision for reconciliation. His leadership transformed a divided nation not through dominance, but through moral authority. Some societies have tried. In the Venetian Republic, for example, leaders were chosen through a complex mix of elections and random draws designed to prevent any single faction from dominating the process. Other cultures imposed limits on how long leaders could hold office, ensuring no one stayed in power long enough to become corrupt. Today, a few modern organizations have adopted similarly thoughtful models. One of the world's largest hedge funds, for example, embraces radical transparency. Employees at every level are encouraged to critique leadership decisions. Even the founder's performance is regularly reviewed using anonymous feedback. From both Machiavelli's perspective and modern psychological insight, we can extract a series of solutions. First, instead of placing too much faith in interviews or speeches, institutions should focus on tangible past behavior. What has the candidate actually done, and with what results? Second, leadership positions should begin with trial phases, during which peers and subordinates can give feedback through structured, anonymous review systems. This would reduce the risk of rewarding charm over substance. Third, it's essential to divide power. No single person should both propose and approve major decisions. Separating these roles ensures greater accountability and reduces the chance of manipulation. Fourth, organizations should designate someone to challenge prevailing assumptions, the so-called devil's advocate. This formal role ensures that dissenting views are not only tolerated, but valued in decision-making. Lastly, term limits and rotating leadership roles help reduce the psychological erosion that long-term power can bring. Studies confirm that prolonged authority often leads to detachment, entitlement, and ethical decay. All of this points to a core truth that Machiavelli understood deeply. We must design systems that function even when flawed individuals hold power. As one of America's founding fathers once wrote, "If people were angels, no government would be necessary. But since they aren't, institutions must be built to contain ambition and correct its excesses." The US Constitution, with its checks and balances, reflects a Machiavellian realism. It doesn't count on leaders to be noble. Instead, it anticipates that they'll act in self-interest and builds constraints accordingly. Research today agrees that effective leadership depends more on the context than the person. The same leader may thrive in one situation, but fail in another. Not because their character changed, but because the environment did. This insight calls for systems that fit leaders to roles, not just roles to leaders. We've seen that systems across politics, business, and culture often reward traits like narcissism, strategic dishonesty, and foolish overconfidence, not because those traits make someone a good leader, but because they help someone appear like one. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He didn't celebrate vice. He simply acknowledged that leadership requires understanding human nature as it is, not as we wish it to be. And that includes recognizing how easily we are swayed by image over substance. But acknowledging this isn't enough. If we want to improve how we select leaders, we must act. We can prioritize real track records over grand performances. We can build checks into our systems. We can educate people to resist shallow charisma and spot red flags in manipulative behavior. True leadership isn't about dazzling performance or rehearsed speeches. It's about navigating difficult trade-offs, listening when needed, and standing firm when required. Unfortunately, the attributes most suited to those tasks, humility, patience, and reflective thinking, are rarely rewarded during the selection phase. Take, for example, the growing trend of organizations confusing charisma for competence. Leaders who tell people what they want to hear and simplify every challenge often climb faster than those who acknowledge reality's complexity. But such simplifications can create fragile organizations, vulnerable to disruption the moment reality proves more difficult than the leader's promises. This is where Machiavelli's realism becomes especially relevant. He didn't celebrate dishonesty or manipulation as virtues. Rather, he acknowledged their effectiveness in a world where appearances often matter more than substance. His work challenges us to understand these dynamics, not to replicate them blindly, but to design systems that reduce their negative effects. We've also seen how power affects people psychologically. Once someone ascends to a position of control, they begin to see the world differently. Empathy declines, self-deception increases, and the leader starts to believe their own myth. In such a state, poor decisions aren't just possible, they're predictable. That's why structures of accountability are so essential. A good system doesn't just hope the leader will do the right thing. It builds in feedback mechanisms to alert and correct when things go wrong. Peer reviews, term limits, transparency policies, all of these serve as guardrails to ensure leadership stays aligned with purpose rather than ego. And beyond the systems themselves, there's a cultural shift that's needed. We, as a society, must move beyond our obsession with the strongman image of leadership. Strength is important, but it isn't always loud or flashy. True strength is often quiet, resilient, and grounded in ethical clarity. Consider the idea of servant leadership, a model where the leader's role is to support and elevate others rather than dominate. When organizations adopt this philosophy, they often find that performance improves, trust deepens, and innovation thrives. That's no coincidence. It's the result of leadership that aligns with human needs rather than playing to surface-level instincts. As Machiavelli pointed out, people are easily deceived by appearances. But deception only works when those being deceived fail to examine the deeper realities. The more we educate ourselves about the psychology of leadership, the harder it becomes for narcissists and manipulators to gain power through illusions. So here's the challenge. We must become more sophisticated citizens, voters, employees, and followers. We must ask tougher questions and look for deeper answers. We must move beyond the seduction of certainty and learn to value thoughtful uncertainty when it's grounded in honesty. Because at the end of the day, leadership is a mirror. It reflects not only those who hold the reins of power, but also those who put them there. And only when we raise the standards for what we admire and what we accept can start to shift the pattern.